Ever feel like your writing could pack more punch? Especially when you really need to make a point land?
Like something's missing to make your arguments truly persuasive.
Exactly. And I bet you've heard of this book, They Say, I Say.
It's a popular one for good reason.
Right. So today we are diving deep into this book. Think of it as a crash course in crafting arguments that stick.
And the best part, we're not just talking theory here. This is all about giving you practical tools to use right away.
So what's the big secret sauce in They Say, I Say?
Well, it all boils down to treating argumentation like a conversation.
Even in writing.
Even in writing,
Oh.
you're always responding to what others think or believe.
I never thought about it like that.
It's like that back and forth you have when you're really engaged in a topic, even if you don't agree on everything.
You wouldn't just jump into your side without acknowledging what the other person is saying.
Exactly. And that's the heart of they say, I say. You address that they say part first what others are saying before you launch into your own perspective.
Okay, I get it. But why is that so important when I'm writing? Why not just focus on making my own point as strong as possible?
Well, imagine reading something where the writer just throws opinions at you without acknowledging any other viewpoints.
It'd be kind of jarring, wouldn't it? Like a bit aggressive.
Exactly. But when you start by engaging with that, they say, you're showing the reader you've done your homework.
It's like you're saying, hey, I've considered different viewpoints, and here's where I stand.
Right. You're demonstrating that you're not just talking at them, you're inviting them into a dialogue, a conversation.
Okay, so it's about building trust with the reader, showing them I've listened to other voices and still arrived at my own conclusions.
Precisely. And one of the key ways to bring in that they say is through summarizing.
Summarizing, you mean like just rehashing everything I've read?
Not quite. It's about summarizing strategically, choosing what to highlight to support your own argument. You might emphasize certain points made by another author that directly relate to your stance.
Kind of like building a bridge. You're saying, here's what's already been said, and here's how my ideas fit in.
Exactly. You're creating a clear path for the reader to follow, guiding them from familiar territory to the new ground you're covering with your argument.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do I bring in those they say elements effectively?
Quoting your sources is key, but it's easy to fall into the trap of dangling quotations.
Dangling quotations. Those sound a bit dangerous, like a grammatical faux pas. What are they, and how can I avoid them?
They're not as scary as they sound. A dangling quotation is when you just drop in a quote without any context.
So it's like tossing a beautiful diamond ring into a messy drawer. Its value is lost without the right setting.
Love that analogy. To avoid dangling quotations, you got to frame them properly. Explain why that specific quote matters, what it demonstrates. Don't just assume the reader will connect the dots.
So guide them toward my interpretation.
Got it. We've talked about weaving in they say through summaries and quotes. But what about when it comes to actually responding to those viewpoints? It's not always about simply agreeing or disagreeing.
You're right. It's often more nuanced than that, and that's okay.
So, they say, I say, encourages us to explore those gray areas.
Absolutely. Agreeing, disagreeing, or even both at the same time.
Can you give me an example of how that might play out in an argument?
Sure. Let's say you're reading an article about, I don't know, a proposed new policy. You might agree with the problem, but disagree with the solution.
Right.
Or maybe you agree with some parts of their solution, but you see potential downsides they didn't address.
So it's about recognizing the complexity, the nuance.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to use phrases that reflect those subtleties. Instead of a flat, I agree, maybe you say, yes, but have we considered?
Yes, but.
I like that.
Or, while I agree up to a point, I'm not entirely convinced about.
It shows you're really grappling with the argument, not just trying to force everything into an agree or disagree box.
Exactly. It's about adding those layers to your argument, showing you've really thought it through.
Not about being wishy-washy, but about demonstrating critical thinking.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about incorporating those, they say, elements, summarizing strategically, quoting effectively, and navigating the gray areas of agreeing and disagreeing. What's next? How do we really make our argument hit home with the reader?
That's where the so what factor comes in.
The so what factor. Okay, tell me more.
See, even the most brilliant arguments can fall flat if they don't answer one crucial question. Who cares?
Right, like why should I care about this?
Exactly. You have to make it crystal clear why your reader should care about your ideas, why they should invest their time in what you have to say.
It's like when you're telling someone a story and their eyes glaze over because they just don't get why it matters. You've got to connect those dots for them.
Exactly. It's so easy to get caught up in the details of our arguments that we forget to connect them to the bigger picture, to real-world implications. We forget to answer that "so what" question.
So how do we make sure our arguments have that so what power? How do we make those connections for the reader without being too heavy-handed?
Be direct. Tell them. Explicitly tell your reader why your argument matters.
Yeah.
Connect your ideas to larger societal concerns, to ongoing debates, to potential consequences.
So even if I'm writing for a specific audience, I shouldn't just assume they automatically understand why my take on this topic is important.
Exactly. Even experts in a field need those reminders of why a particular argument is significant within the larger scheme of things.
That's a really good point. So we've got our they say down, our I say is polished, and we're making those so what connections. Anything else we should keep in mind to make our arguments even more persuasive?
Well, there's one more technique that can be really powerful: planting a naysayer.
Planting a naysayer? That sounds kind of sneaky. Like, are we talking about making up a weak counter-argument just to easily shoot it down?
No, no, not at all. It's not about being deceptive or anything like that. It's about proactively addressing potential objections to your argument. You see, by acknowledging those counter-arguments, you actually strengthen your own position.
Oh, I see. So it's like anticipating the questions or doubts your reader might have and addressing them head on.
Precisely. And by raising those objections yourself, you're showing that you've thought through your position thoroughly, that you're not just looking for evidence that supports what you already believe.
It's like saying to the reader, look, I'm not afraid of these counterarguments because my reasoning holds up.
Exactly. It adds a level of intellectual honesty and depth to your argument.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually go about planting a naysayer effectively? Where do we start?
It starts with empathy. You put yourself in the shoes of someone who might disagree with you. Ask yourself, what would their objections be? What evidence might they point to? Really try to inhabit that opposing perspective as genuinely as possible.
So it's kind of like role-playing the other side of the argument.
Yeah, exactly. Really getting inside their head. And once you've identified those objections, don't shy away from them. Engage with them.
Explain why those counterpoints might make sense.
Right. Show you understand where they're coming from, but then offer your own counter evidence. Explain why, despite those objections, your perspective still holds water.
So you create this dynamic within the argument. You're acknowledging different sides, considering counterarguments, and then showing why your view is still valid.
Exactly. You're inviting the reader to think critically right alongside you.
Yeah.
It's not about winning or defeating other viewpoints. It's about having a real, thoughtful exchange of ideas.
Wow, this has been eye-opening. We've covered so much ground, from that basic they say, I say framework to strategic summarizing, quoting effectively. Oh, and figuring out how to navigate all those shades of gray when it comes to agreeing or disagreeing, and then planting those naysays.
It's all connected, right?
Absolutely. You've given me so much to think about, for sure. And the best part is, this isn't just for academic papers.
Not at all.
These techniques can level up any kind of persuasive writing.
Think about that email you're dreading, or that blog post you've been meaning to finish.
So how could you use these strategies to make your message really resonate?
Exactly.
This has been fantastic, a really deep dive into what makes an argument sing. We explored the core principles of they say, I say, and learned how to craft arguments that are persuasive, engaging, and thought-provoking. And we learned how to invite our readers into a genuine conversation, a back and forth that helps everyone think more critically.
It's all about that engagement.
Absolutely. So the next time you're about to dive into an argument, whether it's a casual debate or you're crafting that killer essay, take a moment. Ask yourself, what would they say, I say, have me do?
It might just transform the way you approach those conversations.
And your writing, for sure. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the art of argumentation. We'll see you next time.